Welcome. This video is the second of 3 chapters on draft bylaw amendments related to council nominations. This chapter outlines the draft bylaw amendments that are required to enable the implementation of Recommendation Number 1 of the Special Committee of Council on Nominations. Move to a simplified, transparent nomination approach using a formal, structured assessment based on needed skills, knowledge, and attributes. APEGA's existing bylaws give the Nominating Committee the authority to select nominees for election, giving due consideration to the composition of council as required by the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act and General Regulation. However, the bylaws are silent on the authority of the Nominating Committee to develop policies and procedures that facilitate the creation and implementation of a clear, effective process to identify, assess, and present a list of nominees for election. Currently, all eligible nominees are assessed to determine whether they possess the competencies required by Council for the upcoming election year, and those with the desired competencies are recommended for election by the Nominating Committee. However, any nominee who meets the basic eligibility criteria can decide to remain on the ballot for election, regardless of whether they have been assessed to possess the competencies required by Council. The result is a list of nominees for election, with those recommended by the Nominating Committee identified by an asterisk. The Nominating Committee strives to ensure that those with the required competencies to fulfill Council's mandate to regulate the professions and protect the public are identified and brought forward for election. However, the existing process is not well understood by APEGA licensed professionals, and it is not perceived to be transparent. We will now review the draft bylaw amendments pertaining to this recommendation. We will first review the existing wording and then the draft new wording. Part 2, Section 3 of the bylaws is currently titled Nominees. The draft new title for this section is Nomination and Selection of Candidates for Election to Council. Currently, the first part of this bylaw states, "The Nominating Committee, in selecting nominees, shall give due consideration to the composition of the Council as required by the Act, regulations, and bylaws. Write-in nominations for any office, except the President, shall be made in writing. Any such nominations shall be accompanied by the name, professional designation, member number, and signature of any 25 professional members in good standing. Such nominations shall reach the Nominating Committee not later than 180 days prior to the annual meeting and shall be accompanied by the written consent of the nominee or nominees to act if elected. The Nominating Committee shall submit for information to Council a list of nominees for Council, which shall include the President-elect as the sole nominee for President, 3 nominees for Vice President, and at least 3 more nominees for councillors than there are vacancies to be filled on Council." The draft wording to replace this section is, "For the purposes of these bylaws, nominee shall refer to a member who meets the eligibility criteria for nomination set out in Bylaw 3, subsection 3, and has submitted a nomination form in accordance with Bylaw 3, subsection 2, and candidate shall refer to a nominee who has been assessed by the Nominating Committee as having the competencies required on Council for the current election year and whose name will appear on the election ballot. Members who meet the eligibility criteria in Bylaw 3, subsection 3 may be nominated for election to Council by submitting a nomination form to the Nominating Committee in the format required by the Nominating Committee, and providing any additional information or documentation required by the Nominating Committee, which may include, but is not limited to, information or documentation relevant to the nominee's competencies, references from 1 or more professional members or professional licensees in good standing, and references from other individuals." Now we will review the draft changes to statements pertaining to eligibility. The existing wording of the introductory statement in this section is, "In order to be eligible for nomination and election, a nominee." The draft new wording is, "In order to be eligible for nomination, selection as a candidate or election, a nominee or candidate The current wording of subsection A reads, "A nominee must be and remain a member of the association in good standing." Draft new wording. A nominee or candidate must, at the time of nomination and at all times between nomination and the closing of the polls, be and remain a professional member or professional licensee of the association in good standing. The current wording of subsection B reads, "A nominee must not, at the time of selection of nominees by the Nominating Committee, be the subject of a complaint of unprofessional conduct or unskilled practice that has been referred to the Discipline Committee for a formal hearing." Draft new wording. A nominee or candidate must not, at the time of nomination or at any time between nomination and the closing of the polls, be the subject of a complaint of unprofessional conduct or unskilled practice that is the subject of an interim suspension or has been referred to the Discipline Committee for a formal hearing. The current wording of subsection C reads, "A nominee must not have admitted to or have been found to have engaged in unprofessional conduct or unskilled practice for a 5-year period immediately prior to his or her nomination." Draft new wording. A nominee or candidate must not have admitted to or have been found to have engaged in unprofessional conduct or unskilled practice during the 5-year period immediately prior to their nomination or at any time between nomination and the closing of the polls. The current wording of subsection D reads, "A nominee must not have admitted to or have been found guilty of an offense under the Criminal Code of Canada or the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act for a 5-year period immediately prior to his or her nomination." Draft new wording. A nominee or candidate must not have admitted to or have been found guilty of an offense under the Criminal Code of Canada or the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act during the 5-year period immediately prior to their nomination or at any time between nomination and the closing of the polls. The current wording of subsection E reads, "A nominee must not be and must not have been for a 3-year period immediately prior to his or her nomination an employee of the association." Draft new wording. A nominee or candidate must not be and must not have been for a 3-year period immediately prior to their nomination an employee of the association. The current wording of subsection F reads, "A nominee must not occupy a position with the Government of Alberta where the nominee has direct influence on the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act." Draft new wording. A nominee or candidate must not, at the time of nomination or at any time between nomination and the closing of the polls, occupy a position with the Government of Alberta where the nominee or candidate has direct influence on the Engineering and Geoscience Professions Act. Subsection G remains as currently written. It reads, "A nominee must be nominated in accordance with the provisions of these bylaws," and a new subsection H has been added that reads, "A nominee or candidate must, at the time of nomination or at any time between nomination and the closing of the polls, comply with all policies, procedures, rules, and undertakings that apply to nominees and candidates." Bylaw 3, Section 4 remains the same and reads, "Nominees for President or Vice President shall have served on the Council." The following recommended changes to Bylaw 3 address the process to ensure a formal, structured assessment of nominees based on needed skills, knowledge, and attributes is in place. Currently, Bylaw 3, subsection 5 states, "The written consent of the nominees to act, if elected, shall be secured and shall accompany the list of nominees." The draft replacement subsections are as follows. Section 3, subsection 5 will read, "The Nominating Committee shall assess each nominee in accordance with policies and procedures developed by the Nominating Committee to determine whether the nominee has the required competencies to become a candidate for election to Council in the upcoming election, taking into account the following factors. A. the requirements of the Act, the regulations, and the bylaws with respect to the composition of Council. B. Current or expected vacancies on Council. C. Competencies that relate to the duties and functions of councillors, or that may not be adequately represented among the councillors currently on Council. And D. The diversity that exists within the profession. Additional draft new subsections read: only the nominees who are selected as candidates by the Nominating Committee will be placed on the ballot for election to Council. The Nominating Committee shall inform Council of the candidates for each office. Notwithstanding Bylaw 3, Section 6, the President-elect shall be the sole candidate for President. If a candidate ceases to meet any of the eligibility requirements in Bylaw 3, Subsection 3 at any time before the closing of the polls, the Nominating Committee has the authority to remove the candidate from the ballot by a 2/3 majority vote. Before voting to remove a candidate from the ballot, the Nominating Committee shall make reasonable efforts to notify the candidate of the basis on which the Nominating Committee is considering removing the candidate from the ballot, and to provide the candidate with an opportunity to respond in writing or orally at the discretion of the Nominating Committee. Timelines shall be determined by the Nominating Committee, having regard to the specific circumstances. With the draft introduction of the term candidate, 2 additional amendments are required to ensure consistency throughout the bylaws. Under Section 6 of the Bylaw, Conduct of Elections, the phrase persons nominated for office will be replaced with the words candidates. Under Section 8, Subsection 2, Counting of Ballots, the word nominee will be replaced with the word candidate. These draft bylaw amendments supporting implementation of Recommendation Number 1 of the Special Committee would continue to enable all members to enter the nomination process, define nominees as members who meet the eligibility criteria for nomination, have submitted a nomination form, and will be assessed by the Nominating Committee. Define candidates as nominees who have been assessed by the Nominating Committee to have the competencies required by Council for the upcoming election cycle and whose names will appear on the ballot. Remove the ability for individuals to self-nominate directly onto the election ballot if they have not been assessed by the Nominating Committee as having the required competencies. Clarify the nomination process and ensure it is fully transparent to members.